Hey guys, welcome back. It is Monday, December 9th, and I want to talk with you a little bit about this concept, sympathetic or deaf ears. Sometimes you hear of something, a complaint or words or a question landing on deaf ears, and what that means is, I don't want to hear it. So I'm asking you if you have sympathetic or deaf ears. And this sort of revolves around the conversation that we were driving towards at the end of class today, as we were reading the story and finishing up our time with the Ghost of Christmas Past. And the sterno can that I left you with, your portable fire starter for the day, which you can find just below this post, was what events in Scrooge's life led him to be who he is instead of who he was. And actually, I should say who he is instead of who he was. I got to remember it's mirrored now. What led him to be the way he is, and do you have any kind of sympathy for Scrooge? Now, we talked on Friday, and really throughout, as we begin to understand who Scrooge is, we say, listen, none of what he's been through excuses his behavior. But we tend to understand his behavior as a result of us understanding what he's been through in his life in the past. Now, this is a difficult question. We talked a little bit about, during the course of either today or on Friday, for some of the classes, this notion that it must be really hard for Scrooge to look into the eyes and the face of his nephew, knowing that one of the people he loved the most in life is not here anymore. And this person looks and sounds exactly like her. And it's hard for Scrooge to be around him, and maybe that's why he treats him so badly. It's not an excuse for his behavior, but we start to see a little more of a tender side to Scrooge, even though his reality is so harsh to his nephew. Now, we also talked today, as we saw him interact with Fezziwig, that we see he was actually mentored and apprenticed, mentored by an apprentice to, I should say, this big, huge, fat but jolly, really friendly, really nice, really amazing boss in Fezziwig. And this guy really was the opposite of what Scrooge is. He had this humongous counting house. He was incredibly rich, and yet the things that were most important to him were his employees and his family and his wife. It says that he was the greatest dancer basically in all of London, and yet he was this shrewd businessman who made a lot of money and who was very good at what he did. But that also meant that when he left work and made sure he spent time with his family, because dance was a recreational activity. Well, you don't get good at recreational activity unless you take some time for recreation, and you don't get good at it with your wife unless you are spending your time with your wife getting good at this. And we see Scrooge respond, and he says, the Spirit even says to him, how stupid. All of these idiots at this party are so happy and they're so in awe of Fezziwig, and he barely spent any money on it. And Scrooge does something very strange. He gets pulled back to this guy who he used to be. He said, it's not about the money. What? Scrooge just told the Spirit it wasn't about the money? Who is this guy? This guy in Scrooge's past, who he used to be, doesn't care about money, cares about relationships and people far more than money. He said, we were poor, he was rich, but it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like he was our boss, it felt like he was our friend. It's not about the money. And then he goes, oh no. I wish I could say something to my Clark right now. Remember the bookkeeper that he treats so terribly? And we're seeing this kind of creep up a little bit. We're seeing Scrooge change an awful lot as we're reading through this book. He saw himself as a lonely, poor child. And then he remembers that just that very day, he was horrible to a child who wanted to sing Christmas carols for a bit of change. And he chased him away with a ruler. And now he's saying, seeing how the boss who had the power to make his life happy or a living you-know-what, and he chose to make him happy and be wonderful to his employees, Scrooge is realizing, I'm not like that. I wish I were like that. I wish I remembered this guy who I used to be and treated my clerk better. I wish I could say something to him right now. We're seeing these changes. And maybe it's starting to make us feel a little bad that Scrooge maybe didn't even realize that he had descended into this. And that's confirmed for us by this next person that we run into. This fiance of his that we had no idea even existed because she's not with him anymore. And she's talking to him in this Christmas past and saying, look, our engagement is broken. I'm releasing you from the contract that you said you wanted to marry me and would be with me for the rest of your life. You're not the same man you were when you made that contract. That guy doesn't even exist anymore. You have become consumed with this greed, Scrooge. This want to be rich, and you're not the same person anymore. What used to be important to you isn't important to you anymore. And that money, that need for money has taken my place. And he's saying, no, 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 no. I want to be rich so we don't have to be poor anymore. You were poor, I was poor. I want us to be secure. The world is so hard on people who are poor. Poverty strikes so hard. I don't want us to be poor. We look back and we say the beginning of Scrooge's desire to be rich wasn't for his own selfishness. It was so that his wife could have a life free from the care of poverty. And she leaves him because even the best intentions have turned to the point where she says, listen, if you hadn't met me yet, there's no way that you would want to be with me now, being as poor as I am, because you're obsessed with being rich and comfortable. So even though it started as a good desire, Scrooge's inability to see anything but money let his fiancée just walk right out the door. And in the next scene, the last scene, that really just kind of tortures Scrooge. This goes back to the question that I asked when we were starting the book. Should a person be forced to relive his past in order to change him? Well, we already see Scrooge changing, and yet the ghost of Christmas Past is really sticking the poker in him. He takes Scrooge to this woman and her new husband and whole big happy family's house to watch what he could have had but walked away from because money was too important to him, or what she walked away from because the money had taken her place. Now, this was a poor, well, not a poor house, but not a rich house by any stretch of the imagination. It was filled with kids, but it looked like a happy house, a loving house, and that's what he missed out on. And he even says, I could have had this. This is rough. I feel bad for the guy. This guy is being forced to be tortured. He even says to the Spirit, why are you torturing me? And the Spirit says, hey, listen, man, I'm the ghost of Christmas Past. You did this, not me. Don't shoot the messenger. Don't be mad at me, the Spirit, for showing you, the person who could have controlled all this, what happened as a result of who you became. I mean, I feel bad for the guy. I mean, he treats people like garbage, and that doesn't excuse his behavior. But this guy's had a rough life, a rough go of it. Is it by his own hand? Yeah, a little bit. But just like when I talk to you in class, and you think I'm dogging you, whoever you are, about your behavior, or about your work ethic, or about your homework, or about whatever, you know, I'm not doing it to be a jerk to you. I'm doing it in hopes that your future is better than your past. Because your actions, whether you mean to show something like disrespect or irresponsibility or just not caring, etc., 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 whether you want that to be the case or not, your actions are leading you down a path. Just like Scrooge's actions led him down a path. and you may not like where you end up in the end, and you may need somebody to come in and say, hey, listen, I hate to beat you over the head with this, but you need to learn this. So I have sympathy for being in this place, but I also have sympathy for the Spirit. When you want to teach a lesson, sometimes it requires you being harsh. So my question is, a sympathetic or a deaf ear from you? Either way, we are learning more and more about the character, and more we're able to connect and maybe even apply this to our life, because Charles Dickens is so great. His sentences are so fluid, and his choice of words is so impeccable, and the voice and the spirit of what he's trying to say is coming through. The ideas and content are reaching you to the point where we fully understand and can connect. And that's happening because we are committing to being quality readers. I want you to continue on that path, and maybe start to evaluate what you really think about how people learn lessons and the means that people would go to try to teach them. Have a great day, guys.